Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Sinclair. I'm the CEO of Enterprise Alumni. For those of you that don't know, we are the leading alumni engagement and management platform for large enterprises. We're privileged to be serving customers and their alumni communities around the world. I want to thank those of you joining us live or listening on the podcast. We've seen a real explosion of interest globally on this topic, and today is no different, with over 300 of you choosing to spend 1 hour with us. So I really appreciate you making the time. And of course, if you have any questions, please do post them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. This is the Corporate Alumni Leaders series, where we speak to thought leaders, industry experts, and more to better understand and gain insight into how to think about an alumni program for your organization. As a result of this series, we heard tremendous feedback from you, our community, kind of keen to understand what everyone else is doing, how everyone else is engaging their alumni community. So I'm also excited to announce the launch of alumniaces.com, a new community platform specifically for alumni leaders to network, ask questions, exchange ideas, and ultimately see what everyone else is doing. Please feel free to head to alumniaces.com and join this community. So with that, today, the conversation is about the talent pool and the critical importance of organizations embracing former employees to accelerate recruiting, drive good fit recruits, and more importantly, how companies should be thinking and understanding how impactful this community can be. And not only to adapt to change, to impact the bottom line, but also moving this conversation of alumni and staying in contact with your former employees from a nice to have to a must-have foundation of any organization. I think 2020 was the year we saw alumni communities hit mainstream. For many companies, setting up an alumni program was not out of choice, but a reality, where they're having to let go of amazing people due to COVID and wanting a way to stay connected. So 2020 made companies exponentially more human. And there is really nothing more human than supporting your people throughout their career, wherever that might take them. Alumni has gone from a mailing list and a directory to now, with our platform, delivering value to alumni through networking, learning, volunteering, mentoring, job opportunities, and so much more. I'm so thrilled today to introduce my guest, Kathi Enderes, the Vice President of Research of Josh Bersin Academy. Since I first met Kathi, I told her she was the secret weapon any company needs as they think about the future of work. Her insight into how HR impacts the bottom line and drives agility for organizations is incredible. And that's what today is about. You know, why are alumni programs so critical to any organization? And so with that, Kathi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. And I want to turn it over to you. I'd love to kick it off by asking kind of what's your journey that kind of got you to this point, and what is it you do with Bersin Academy?
Yeah, thank you, James. And thanks for the great words. I feel very flattered and very happy about joining you. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background. If you think about, if you listen to me, you'll hear that I have some kind of accent. That accent is from Austria, in case you're wondering. Got that out of the way. So I'm originally from Austria, born and raised there. I have a PhD in mathematics. I swear I'm not kind of this weird person. I just really love mathematics. Wanted to be a professor for mathematics, but I decided not to go that route. But I started in management consulting then back in Vienna, very long time ago with Ernst & Young. Spent some time management consulting in Austria, then moved to London for a couple of years with PricewaterhouseCoopers at that time, also consulting, client-facing consulting, and then had the opportunity in 2000 to move to San Francisco. With PwC at that time, and I took that opportunity and have lived there for the majority since then. I'm right now actually in southern Spain, but usually I'm located in San Francisco. And then I kept going the management consulting route for a couple of more years or 5 more years. And then I really wanted to understand what it was like to be in my client's shoes. So I chose to go into an organization, and really it was very educational, and I learned a lot about what it means to actually live with the things that I consulted on. So I joined McKesson, a very large healthcare services organization and distribution organization, and then worked there for a couple of years in organizational effectiveness in the HR, performance management, talent kind of space, and then Kaiser Permanente, and spent quite a long time there, also in that same kind of area. And then later on, I decided to go back into a different kind of consulting. So I went into research with Deloitte Consulting and did some research on talent and workforce and performance management and employee engagement and experience and those kind of topics. And then a few months ago, I had the opportunity to actually join Josh Bersin, who, if you're in HR, you probably know him, in his area and at the Josh Bersin Academy to lead research there. So that's kind of my journey. And so as part of my job at the Josh Bersin Academy, I get to talk with a lot of organizations, with a lot of leaders in organization about their practices, about their talent problems, about their people strategies, and then also with a lot of solution providers. So tech companies that try to address and solve these people problems with technology. So very, very exciting role. And I just love doing this work and getting a lot of insights. I'm kind of a data geek. And when I get insights from data, from surveys or something, I can't wait to dive in there. And so you'll hear me quote some numbers. I'm not quoting these numbers so you remember them, just to show you a little bit of what we learned from organizations. But for the most part, talking with organizations, talking with solution providers about how what people problems they face and what opportunities they face and how they approach them. That's kind of my job.
And I saw you guys released that monster study that kind of sparked this reconversation of, a couple of thousand large organizations. And I think when you think about the attendees or people listening into this, that's what they're thinking. What's everybody else doing? What's my industry doing? What keeps me competitive? What does competitive look like? So if I can, and for those on the call who already understand this, I apologize. If I can start with kind of this word of employee experience. There was this line that Josh Bersin said that I have stolen with credit, of course, which is the employee experience doesn't end at the exit interview. And that is a line that always rang true and was great for this organization. Kind of wish I was the one that came up with it. But I guess, what does that mean? How can employee experience not end at the exit interview if you're leaving the company? And how is employee experience anything more than just don't be awful? Can you provide a little bit of context around that statement?
I love the don't be awful. So I want to backtrack a little bit about this buzzword of employee experience and where it came from and why we hear that all the time. I think everybody, pretty much like maybe 80-90% of the solution providers I talk with say they provide something in employee experience, right? A lot of tech companies want to solve that employee experience problem and opportunity, but it didn't used to be like that. This concept of employee experience is actually not that old. It's about maybe 5 years old or 6 years old. Before that, like way before that, back in the 90s or 80s, maybe, it was about employee satisfaction, right? So organizations were sending out surveys and asking people, do you like working here? And what do you like? What do you not like? Right. And then usually they didn't do anything about it because people probably said, we don't like the pay, right? We want more money. And the organization said, tough, I can't give you more money. So that was that. So it wasn't all that useful, right? These employee satisfaction surveys. And then that concept moved into employee engagement, right? So employee engagement is still very important, but it's not everything, because the employee experience, really, the way that we see the employee experience is everything that impacts you as a person, not just when you're at work, but also when you're not at work. And what that means also, the person that you are doesn't start to be a person when you join the organization, and you don't stop being a person when you leave the organization, right? You're still the same person, and you also don't leave. Of course, you don't stop when you go back home, and back home is not even a thing right now if we're all remote, because we're all back home anyway when we're at work. So this concept of really holistically thinking about the whole person and their family life and their financial wealth and health and well-being and their work and the management around them and how much they trust the organization and the workplace and the work environment. All of this is the employee experience. And so why the employee experience doesn't stop when you leave the organization? Of course it doesn't stop, because you don't stop being a person that was ever working with this organization, and you don't stop being a potential person that will work with the organization again, right? So you're a very important part of the talent pool, and I know we're going to talk more about why we think this is a very important part of the talent pool. But if you want to think about the person actually as the whole person, it doesn't stop, right? So that's why employee experience, and we actually, when I was with Deloitte, we did a study on employee experience. We called it workforce experience because we didn't want to assign just the person as an employee, because the employee means you're not an employee anymore when you leave, so therefore it stops there. So we called it workforce experience. And what we found there was the moments that matter are actually not the moments that matter, which I found funny. When you're in HR, you talk sometimes you talk a lot about moments that matter. You get a promotion, you get a raise, or you change your manager, or you change your job, or maybe you'll get married, or you move, like things that happen in your life. But how often do these things really happen, right? It's not all that often. But what really matters is both the daily moments in the employees' lives. So how you interact with your team, with your manager, with your customers, what's your job like? Do you feel respected? Do you feel valued? And then also the bookends. And what we call the bookends is the candidate experience and the alumni experience. So those were the more impactful actually moments, rather than these like HR moments of performance management and promotion and those kind of things.
So if we think about that kind of second bookend, companies spend a lot of time, a lot of money on the onboarding. We see everyone on LinkedIn. I just started here, and you see a photo of their laptop, their new water cooler, their hat,
the badge,
pair of socks, the bag, and you're like, oh my God, I have 900, bottles of water from different companies. But you see a lot of people so excited to start. Here's my ID. If we recognize the employee experience is so critical, and especially now where people are at home, not only being a full-time employee, but also being a parent, being a kindergarten teacher, being a high school teacher, being, being a therapist, being all of these new roles that have come up in this year. If that bookend is so important, I want to talk a little bit about how people leave. I've never really understood why people don't treat leaving as good as they treat joining. There is the CHRO of Starbucks. I've always credited him. He might not have said it. Said, when you leave our company, you are promoted from employee to customer. And I thought that was a really great way of saying it. We know the importance. It's the last touch point as you walk out the organization. When you go to your next job, someone's going to say, where did you work? And you're going to say, I worked at X. Phew, I escaped. Or it's amazing. I hope we get to do something with them. Why do companies have this, you're done? Why would we invest money in the offboarding? Why would we invest money in how you walk out the door when it's just so obvious that not being awful includes making sure we shake your hand on the way out and wish you luck? Why is that so hard for companies kind of, to execute?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I can only speculate what some of the reasons are. One of them could be historic, right? Because way back when, people didn't change jobs all that often, right? So when you left an organization, a lot of times you left the organization because you were retiring and you'd never come back because you retired. And it wasn't like now where you're retiring and then you kind of come back and you do some gig work or contract work or something. When you retired, and I'm talking like 30, 40 years ago or something, you retired and you were gone, right? So and then maybe you got like a gold watch or something because you worked there for like 50 years or 30 years. And that was that, right? So you didn't need to be in touch because then you wanted to be retired. But things have changed so much, right? Nobody really retires when they retire. Everybody says, oh, I'm retired. And then you talk with them again and they said, oh, I'm doing some consulting work with my old company, or I'm just like talking with customers from my old company, whatever, right? So people are usually not ever retired. And of course, people change jobs and companies a lot more frequently than they used to be. So one of them might be historic. It's just ingrained. This is how we do it, right? Maybe we shake their hand, but why stay in touch? Because there's no reason to stay in touch. So I think that's one reason.
Assets on the balance sheet, I guess, that you would treat in that manner. If you invested that much money, and I'm not calling people assets, but I'm just making a very clear statement that they do have asset methodology. You invest them in, you develop them, and they grow. And, how the CFO of the organization is not livid that that's how you're treating your assets. Essentially, when they're done, just knocking them off. It's almost should be a financial conversation, which I think kind of moves to this next thing that I want to talk about, which is this tangible benefits. We go back to companies have a hard time because this is how we've always done it. So you can throw any number around alumni out that you want, that it's the number one source of hire. They stay 2 years longer, time to fill reduced by 50%. We can throw any data point out, but some companies still look at it as like a fun community. And I guess to be more specific, I want to talk about this conversation of the impact of having access to use your words and hopefully not stealing them that you're about to say, pre-vetted, pre-qualified talent pool. Like, well, where is the data or where is the impact that allows this conversation to go into the boardroom, which is where it belongs, in our opinion?
Yeah. No, it definitely. And I think the people conversation is in the boardroom. And I think it's slowly the employee experience, including alumni, is actually also going into the boardroom. But because people were not even in the boardroom some years ago, right? I think the people conversation has now moved up into the boardroom. Health is now in the boardroom, and experience is also getting into the boardroom. I think I'll share a few numbers with you in a little bit from a study that we had. But I think the other thing, the other point I wanted to make about why is it so hard, I think your Starbucks example is actually a really great one, because in our experience, consumer companies and also financial services companies are usually very good at this, because they know they need to, every employee is also a customer, a potential customer. And I think it's a little bit more of a stretch, but not a very big stretch for the B2B organization. So it shouldn't be, right? Because I listened to one of your podcasts actually where you had a guest from EY, and he explained, this partner explained that like some of the CFOs of their clients, of course, are now alumni that they have in their alumni channel. And of course, when there's really not a lot of differentiation between different services, between EY and PwC and Deloitte and Accenture and so on, they are going to pick the one where they feel they have a relationship. And the relationship, because even businesses, they're not businesses, they're still people behind the businesses. So I think if you bring it back to the people, it should be obvious, and not just for consumer companies, but generally, like the consumer companies, they're also better in employee experience generally, because they're very good at customer experience, because they see that they know what the customer is, that the customer is actually a person, and then it's not a very big leap. Or here's a person, here's another person, right? So they don't think about organizations, they think about people.
Almost all of
so
these
I think industry-wise,
started. I'm sorry, I apologize, Kathi, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think you're so right that, professional services, financial services, their programs actually started from a sales and a human kind of perspective. HR has been the recent kind of win, because we now have data. Oh my God, you've got a talent pool. When this first started for some of the people on this call, this had nothing to do with the talent pool. This was just, it's the right thing to do, maintain a relationship, see where it goes. That was it. The business case was, it's the right thing to do. It wasn't, a 72-page Excel spreadsheet. And I think, that kind of ties into what you were talking about, which is now you have the people experience, and therefore that conversation has to continue. And it doesn't matter whether you're a brand advocate, a sell, a recruit, a business development. Keeping in touch with people is good for business. I think we're almost going full circle back to the beginning, where companies are being like, of course it's good for business. That is the business case. And what comes of it based on if we're good to our people. And that reminds me of the conversation that you brought up when you were on our earlier call around talent mobility and how alumni fit into this kind of conversation of internal mobility. Companies spend millions of dollars on succession planning, talent management, skill mapping, retraining or training existing employees versus looking for new ones. Why? I mean, are alumni part of the internal talent community? Should they be privy to internal jobs? Should they be treated the same way, given they worked here, they've been vetted, they've qualified, they've done the background checks, and they left on good terms?
Yeah, I think they absolutely should. I don't think HR is there yet, because even the talent mobility is kind of fraught with a number of issues, including cultural issues. And what I mean by that is, one of the biggest problems when we talk with companies about talent mobility, internal talent mobility, moving people around, employees for now, moving people around to different jobs in your organization, is talent hoarding. Like, it's cultural, right? Because if you're a manager and you have these really great people, you don't want to give them up usually, because the way that you incentivize is if you get your results done, right? So you want to hold on to them, even though they might want to go into a different direction, even though it's going to be good for the business, good for the organization. It's not going to be good in the short term for your little team. And the way that most managers are incentivized is not as net talent exporters, but talent hoarders, right? So you say, oh, you got to have a lot of retention, and retention means I won't let you go. And if you're a good person, I especially won't let you go. That actually could be alleviated with the alumni because they're not in your immediate team, right? So that could be a little bit of an easier sell, right? And there's so much talk about values fit, culture fit, not so much, because culture fit is kind of a problematic thing, right, with diversity and inclusion, but values fit. Are they actually fitting the values and the purpose of your organization? Do they know how you do things around here? Does their culture like align with how they want to be working? And all of this is already behind you, right? Because you're like, they've worked for you successfully in the past. So I think it should absolutely be like that. And let me talk a little bit about the new war for talent. So the war for talent, actually, this concept of the war for talent has been around for a really long time too. I think McKinsey coined this term maybe in the late 90s or something like that. And it's funny because it's so overused, but and you might think, well, we don't have a war for talent right now because aren't we in the big pandemic and didn't a lot of people lose their jobs? But interestingly enough, we have, at the end of December, in December, we had 13 million jobs open in the US, which is almost exactly the same number as a year before in December 2019. Right. So it's not that there's no jobs open. All the HR people, all the talent people, and all the leaders even that we talk with, nobody says, yep, I don't need any more people. I have all the skills. I have all the capabilities. No, I'm good. And like everybody says, we need new talent. We need new skills, different skills. We need skills in different areas. We need to redeploy people, reskill people. So the talent crisis, although there's a lot of unemployment, has not gone away at all. Skills shortages are still there. Tech companies, for example, they don't, like, most of their business has gone up quite significantly in the last year, and they can't keep up with the demand, right? So they can't find enough people. But then also even hourly people, like delivery truck drivers, of course, or healthcare nurses, right? We heard all these stories about nurses and nurses coming back from retirement. Well, guess what? They're your alumni, right? They're your alumni. And if you kept those nurses on your alumni group in your alumni community, you will be the healthcare organizations that are going to bring them back, and not another one, right?
Yeah. I want to touch on that, Kathi, if I can for a second, which is the retarees. You know, very often people think, why do I need to invest money in the retirees? There's no need. And what you're seeing now in the US, the plan our new president just came out with out here was, I'm going to pull out the retiree doctors. They're going to be the ones who are going to do the distributions. Right. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of doctors in retirement who pledged an oath to do right by people, who are thrilled to step up to this cause. But you also see it happening in organizations where, as you said, there are companies who are having to, I mean, we talked about this just before we joined, which is some of the other heroes during this pandemic, not on the front line, some of the HR and talent acquisition people, that any company that has pivoted, that has moved, that has reorganized, that has had to, remove 80% of their staff, there is a team behind that has got people on the ground quickly. And I think that's where we've seen alumni really come into its own in 2020, going into 2021, is companies saying, oh my God, we need this skill and we need it now. And we don't have time to hire the wrong person, which was an interesting new concept for us, which is, the value of hiring the wrong person. We always talk about the value of hiring the right person, quicker, time to bill, but we never talk about, but if you hire the wrong person, how screwed you are. And we saw that. We saw retirees coming back into senior leadership positions with companies because they were saying, we need people who've been through a crisis before. We need people to mentor on our newest leaders. And so when you think about kind of the new face of HR, which is essentially enabling organizations to pivot rapidly, to transform their organization, this talent pool of be it 1,000, 10,000, for some companies, hundreds of thousands of people, what is it going to take for, organizations to be like, it clicks. I get it. Because you and I can talk all day and nod our heads and agree. We have all the guests on the line who are having the same fight I'm having, which is, why are we not getting the same budget that recruitment marketing is getting? Why are we not getting the same budget that, we're spending on Indeed or spending on these job posts? We know the value, how are we positioning this wrong, perhaps? I mean, you very clearly said in one of our early conversations, which I agree, which is, I love all the fluff. I love the goody, the huggy bears and the warm and fuzzies. How does it impact the bottom line? How does it make someone money? And I think that's the move we as community leaders have to take, which is not what we do. As community leaders, we're in the business of hugs and smiles and happiness. And sometimes, and I always say this, the things that count the most are the hardest to count. But ultimately, to move this conversation where the people on the line are going to get the budget and the resources and the drive they need, they have to fundamentally move the conversation. And I guess, I'm not sure what my question is, but I know there's a question there.
Well, I think I understand what your question is. I think I understand what your question is. What you're asking is, how do you convince, I think what you're asking is, how do you convince the business to actually invest in this in the same way as the business invests in talent acquisition, recruiting, marketing, sourcing tools, sourcing, even succession planning, those kind of things. And I think one of the answers that I see here is figure out what matters for your business most. And what I mean by that is, what is your business really about? Is your business about, I know it's usually about making money if you're for profit, but below that, how do you make money? Is it about customer retention? Is it about customer engagement? Is it about what really matters to you most? And then tie this to that. What your business cares about. If you're about customers, and many businesses obviously are about customer retention, customer engagement, customer satisfaction, figure out why alumni, for example, are good for customers. And a study that we had done showed actually that those businesses, when we studied pandemic responses, so how businesses responded to the pandemic, and we studied 1,400 organizations across the globe. And we looked at all these different practices that you could be doing, all the way from remote work and safe workplace to learning and development to hiring and quickly hiring and recruiting people. And interestingly enough, quickly hiring the right people and bringing them up to speed was the number one driver of most outcomes. Not the actual pandemic responses, because this is not a pandemic response. This is just a necessity that you have to do anyway. And you would think, well, who cares about in the pandemic if we quickly hire? But it was associated, highly correlated with customer satisfaction, highly correlated with customer satisfaction, highly correlated with financial returns, even highly correlated with employee engagement. Because if you think about it, if you're short-staffed, for example, and you have to do 2 jobs at the same time, you're not going to be very happy. Your customers are not going to be very happy. And how does an alumni fit in? Well, of course it fits in, because quickly hiring, I mean, you have your you have all the statistics, you know them better than me, how much more quickly you can actually execute on hiring talent that you already know about versus talent that you don't know about, because there you have to do all the assessments and values fit, and are they going to fit into the team, and is it going to work out, and half the time it doesn't work out. Executive hiring, for example, huge financial burden, and it's a well-known fact that every other executive actually fails. Outside executive fails in their position and in the organization, right? Every other executive fails. Outside hire. But alumni, I bet you would get a much better, if you study that, you would get a much better success rate, because they're actually not an external hire. And the reason for that is all cultural, right? It's all about, well, it was different than they expected, or they couldn't build the team, or they couldn't build relationships, or they just didn't work effectively in this organization, because leadership success doesn't really port over from one organization to another all that well. So
That's
I
a really
think
good point. I never thought about that. I think that's just a tip for every company that it doesn't port over. You're absolutely right. They come in and they may be amazing, but this company doesn't work for them. But you're right. I mean, we know that, and we know that alumni, they also know the skeletons. They know what they're
that's
getting
right.
into.
That's right.
They know the bullshit. They know elevator 3 is slow. They know all of these little things that cause anxiety on a day-to-day basis for so many
That's right.
people. And so by choosing to come back, they are saying, I accept your flaws, you're accepting mine, let's roll.
That's right.
And so that's why you see, Sodexo said people stay 2 years longer. Like there's some really big data around that. I think, Microsoft said that about 15% of their employee base are returners. And so we're starting to see data come out, real data that, Mike from EY, I think he said 17% of their talent, of their entire employee base are returners. Andrea from Citi said, I think on this webinar, about 12%. So we're starting to now see enough data that actually the CFO is going to have to look and be like, well, one second, there's an opportunity here, which leads me to this question of, given the fact that employer brand impacts the entire business, everything. There is nothing employer brand doesn't impact, whether you are in procurement, sales, HR, technical support, or or janitorial services. Employer brand is employer brand. Does an alumni program that has the principal driver of being a talent community for change and for those things, does it live in HR? Is that the right place for it to live? Or, how do you deal with kind of this new world where teams need to actually be multiple stakeholders from across the business? Like, how does that even work, like as a company, as a big organization?
It's so interesting because I think it's a little bit the same question that we have hear a lot and talk a lot about in the overall employee experience, right? Because HR alone can't own the employee experience. Well, HR doesn't own talent, if you want, right? Because who owns talent? Well, everybody. Just like finance doesn't own financial performance. Every manager, every leader owns financial performance. HR doesn't own talent, right? Every manager, every leader, every person actually owns the employee experience. Every employee owns the employee experience. So in the employee experience, the way that I always like to approach this question, and I think it's the same really for alumni programs, is it really, it can live anywhere really, as long as they work with the right stakeholders, the right people, right? So you can't do it alone. And maybe HR owns it, maybe communication owns it, maybe, I don't know, marketing owns it. I don't think IT should own it. That's like the only group that I don't think should own it. But it really, I don't think it matters so much, because whoever owns it will have to work with all these other groups. They have to work with somebody who is in marketing. They have to work with somebody who is in communication, corporate communication. They have to work, of course, with the business. They, of course, have to work with IT too, if they're using a tool like yours, right? So they have to work with all these different groups across the organization. To build this program and to keep it aligned. They probably have to work with legal, right? Because sometimes legal and compliance comes into play here too. What are people saying, and how do we handle if there's comments that are like inappropriate, like those kind of things. So I think HR is actually, I feel HR is a good owner of it, but only if they own it not alone, but they build the program out in the way that they bring the right people in that have the right experience. And I think community experience is a certain skill. You wouldn't do marketing without marketing skills and just say, well, yeah, I know something about what marketing is, and now I'm going to do marketing. I'm not qualified, right? Because I haven't done it before. But there's probably people that know this. And if there's not people that know this in your organization, then probably you can build this skill or buy this skill, right? So you could probably find somebody, or you can build it within your organization, or a combination of both, right? You can bring a consultant in and help somebody develop. I think acknowledging this is an actual thing to be done, not just something that's on the side and somebody, oh yeah, well, I know how to do a online chat, so I know how to run a community. I think that's
a really open, by the way, number one, that's the best answer I've heard to where should this program live. And I've never really thought about the fact that HR doesn't own talent, the individual manager does. And it's a company wide. And I think it's the same with this. I think that's a great reflection. We're seeing a lot of programs move to kind of the office of the CEO or the office of the COO, essentially saying, look, alumni is dotted line touching everything. It just needs to live there and needs to have the executive sponsorship. I think that kind of leads to that, next question, exactly kind of what you mentioned, which was, so this goes into HR, this goes into talent acquisition team, because they view this as an incredible tool that they can use to access talent, build the community. But no one's actually got community experience. No one's actually been a community leader, and no one has spare headcount space to hire what would be considered a fun huggy bear job, lead this community and make them feel great. No one has that right now. And I understand that the answer is, well, they need to, but you do see a lot of organizations where the people leading the alumni efforts see the value, understand the value, but have never been community leaders, and so they want to access the output without putting in the input. And so that's why that question of where it should always live is an interesting one, because generally someone in comms potentially has a little community experience, or someone in marketing somewhere has, an iota of that, which I think leads me to the next big one I have, which is around companies investing in training for people that have left. Essentially, one of the things that we saw with one of our customers who had to let go of just a majority of their staff, and we talked about this earlier, of how amazing this lady was, who had to let go of all of their staff because their doors are closed, and then had to let go of herself because she's like, I have no staff. You don't need a global head of HR. You need someone to move some papers. But one of the things that she did before she left was basically tell these people, specifically on ground floor, blue collar, retail level, go learn some skills, access our LMS, access our LinkedIn Learning, access these things, learn how to use Zoom and Teams and Slack, and how to set up the lights and the microphone, because those are skills that people need urgently right now. And so she heavily felt an obligation to reskill this entire community, of which maybe I'm sure some of them might come back, but essentially just because she said it was the right thing to do. That was it. Wow. It's the right thing to do. Wow. Like they're sitting at home, they're in retail, they're skilled in retail. So either they're going to Amazon or they're not doing anything for the next, X months, or we can teach them how to do tech support on Teams and Zoom, and they actually become, a more upskilled citizen, because it's a very functional learning thing. You either know how to use it or you don't. For me, I was like, oh my God, where was that leader when I was going through my career, someone who thinks about people like that. And I told her that, but I guess, isn't there a global obligation of every company to kind of do right? But it's tough to qualify. How the hell do you put that on an ROI calculator?
That's so interesting. And I think it's a really good point. And I'm so glad you bring this up, because at Deloitte, we've been doing a human capital trend study for 10 years. And about 3 years ago, where they asked 10,000 CEOs and C-level executives about their people priorities. And it used to be more HR kind of more tactical things. And in the last 3 years, this concept of the social enterprise has come up. And what they mean by the social enterprise is an enterprise or an organization that doesn't just measure themselves, their success by financial performance, but they see not just shareholders as their stakeholders, but then also employees, communities, society. And so they see their success as of course financial success. Without that you can't survive, but it's not enough. Financial success is not enough. But then also, how do they provide more value to the communities they serve, and how do they help people, for example, that they had to let go to find new jobs? And there's been an incredible opportunities and things that organizations have done on like talent marketplaces, for example, helping people find another job at another company, treating their alumni as actually people rather than treating them as, we had to let you go, tough luck.
We saw one of our customers do exactly that. They included the jobs feed for all of their partners in their ecosystem, all of their customers, all of their vendors in their kind of career board in alumni, and said, we don't have any jobs for you. Well, we do. We always have jobs, but we don't have any jobs for you specifically. So here's everyone in our ecosystem, and we'll give you a reference. Go work for a customer. And what they actually found out is, or what they saw is exactly what you'd expect, which is the terminated employee who was not terminated because they were bad, they were terminated because there was no business, is suddenly feeling very positive about the organization that just essentially terminated them and gave them financial insecurity, because they see, this effort that they're taking. And I think that's, I think the social enterprise is a really big topic that for the alumni professionals on this call, we have to think about look, the reality is, for financial professionals, you move from this company to this company to this company, you just move around in a circle. What about talent that you asked to leave? So what about this, should there be a path to redemption? Talent, maybe that starts with you and they're just not that great, or they're just not that good, or they're early in their career and you're like, well, maybe we're not the place for you. But they've gone on, you marked them as, ineligible for rehire, but they've gone on to have an incredible career. They've, essentially they learned all their mistakes with you. You fired them, but they learned, and they're never going to do them again. And they've gone on to be amazing. Do they deserve a path to redemption? How do you qualify this concept of, we fired them, but perhaps, like, how does that work? How do you think about that as you think about it from an alumni and a talent pool and a skills conversation?
Yeah, this is a really, really, I think every person has the potential to be a high potential. Everybody is a high potential and a high performer in some area. And maybe we didn't have the right job for them at that time, right? Maybe they were just not a good fit, and we didn't have another job that fit their skills at this time. Or maybe it was just not a good match. But I think there should always be a path to redemption, honestly. It should always be an opening and an open door again, because I don't think that there might be exception cases, of course. It depends on what they did. Like if somebody did something, I don't know, terribly illegal or whatever, maybe that would require you not to look at them. But for the most part, even when people are terminated for performance, maybe, or for cause, the performance usually is circumstantial, right? So it could be that they just they were at a point in their life where they couldn't do it, or they were in the wrong job, and or they couldn't work with this team, whatever, any of those circumstances, or their environment was getting in the way, whatever they had happened in their life, right? So I don't think it should ever be a full closed door. Apart from
one side of me says I think 2020 realized that people have things going on in their life, and for the first time you saw companies they had to accept it. Actually, to be honest, they couldn't not accept it, and whether that's good or bad, I'm not sure. But they've accepted it. The calls that you do where someone has a kid on their, on their shoulders, where you have Barney in the background. This is just life, and you're absolutely right. There are so many scenarios where your poor performance was environmental, whatever that might mean. Your team, your manager, death in the family, like financial stability. And I think now it's become more common to be able to talk about that. But companies are very explicit. So we say that companies should give that path to redemption. We say that companies should think about that. But companies have a tick box that is either eligible for rehire or not eligible for rehire. They don't have a tick box for let's be human and take a moment and see how they've developed over the past 10 years. That doesn't exist. So you and I can scream and throw rocks as much as we want, but companies aren't designed, and HR systems aren't designed to be human at their core. It's a tick box. Eligible for rehire? Yes or no? They go through the resume, goes through the OCR, have the skills? No. There's no... Yeah. So when people talk about employee experience, there actually is no compassion in the process in reality. Is that an unfair statement?
I think it's getting better. I think it used to be like that. And to be fair, I think last year was something that really elevated the empathy or the compassion with a lot of the circumstances and with the what people have going in their lives. And I think, is it going to be an easy fix? Probably not. Is it going to be like, okay, well, now we get rid of this checkbox? Probably not, right? But
Right.
people have started to realize before, I mean, I've seen this firsthand myself, right? Before, when you were working remotely, for example, and somebody walked through your room, right? People like, can't you keep your kids out here, right? And they were kind of
Right.
annoyed. What kind of person are you? And now it's more like, oh, well, here's your kid, right? Oh, here's my cat, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all in the same boat. And it seems much more, people are much more compassionate and empathetic about circumstances in your life. And so I think it's going to be a journey. But like one thing that we have seen in really in the last year, and we have these conversations with many leaders in across many different industries. We have this ongoing discussion group, we call that the Big Reset, where we talk with hundreds of leaders on a weekly basis about topics like leadership and employee experience and learning and talent acquisition and HR transformation and workplace, safe workplace, those kind of topics. One common theme that we have found is what we call human-centered leadership. So leaders, the leader, the business-centered leader, that was purely judged and was purely looking out for business success, for the hard metrics, that doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work anymore because both our employees and our customers actually need us as leaders to understand them and to listen to them and to recognize what they need as human beings to be successful. And so that's like on a macro level, we hear this human-centered leadership. And so what that's going to translate to eventually is HR needs to be much more human-centered, of course, too. And that will translate in things like the checkbox, right?
Yeah.
And
Okay,
can
that
we
makes
actually
sense.
look at that path to redemption?
And so maybe this is the year that those who are thinking about building actively have an alumni program is the year, you know, look, there is no silver lining to this pandemic with the deaths and everything and all of the impact, but maybe one silver lining that potentially exists is companies have become more human. And therefore, the output of that is people who are starting or thinking about this alumni program in their organization that don't quite have the budget, they don't quite have the rank, they don't quite have the visibility, you know, they're in the basement on a typewriter, you know, begging anyone to pay attention. Maybe this is the time to actually, you know, rise up and raise your flag and say, look, you know, this is what we have, this is what's going to work. I have 25,000 people in a talent pool. You want to adapt to change. I think you gave me some numbers, Kathi, last time about this concept of change, and I forgot what they were offhand.
Yeah, there was actually change adaptability. Yeah, we saw that when I talked before about this pandemic response study, and I need to look for the numbers too, but
I think it was something like 4.4x. I think the numbers you gave me, somewhere in the range. I'll assume they might be wrong, so I'll say them so no one quotes you as saying some wrong numbers. I think it was 6x more likely to be able to adapt to change, 4x more likely to achieve financial targets. Were the two, was that rough? I think it was roughly in that range. And I think
that was perfect. And 5 times more likely to have high customer satisfaction if you hire and like recruit the right people rapidly and strategically. And what better way to do that through alumni? So
I mean, that's just such monstrous numbers. So I think one of my key takeaways, you know, as we go to customer questions in a second or from people, I think one of those key takeaways is where we started the conversation. How do alumni programs rise up and get the budget, the recognition, the value based on the impact they have on their organizations? We know they have impact. We see the impact. How do they make it mainstream? And how do they, you know, make sure it's at, you know, the board level? And I think the answer is, if your alumni pool of people can enable your organization to move quicker, to achieve financial targets quicker, and have higher satisfaction, there are no 3 metrics more important than that from a boardroom perspective. So this is not aligning to organizational objectives. This is aligning to why we are an organization and what we do. And so, you know, if there was ever a time for people to kind of peek their head out, you know, the window and be like, hey guys, I want to tell you about what we're doing, this is really it. And I think we tell a lot of alumni leaders, this is now on you to go out and market internally and run and distribute and celebrate your wins. Exactly what you said. Mike from EY celebrates the wins. No one doesn't hear him shout and scream when they hire an alumni, they do business with an alumni, when something happens. But
that's right.
As you know, if you're not getting the attention you deserve, it's exactly the same as kind of, X years ago, the social media teams. Everyone treated them exactly the same. They were in like a weird silo in the basement. Oh, must be some weird 18-year-old kid on the Twitters, and now
that's right, exactly.
And now it's actually not. It's amazing professional writers, people who are spending time to create intelligent content for global distribution. So you've seen the same arc in social, because social became very good at showing wins. I mean, we never believed it, when you saw these things of we had 67 billion impressions, and you're like, well, I'm not sure that's true, but it doesn't matter because you couldn't argue with it. Don't have the data. Social media teams became very good at being able to highlight the wins, the engagements, the things, and the click-throughs and the tracking, and they just wouldn't shut up about it. And to the point, the companies were like, one sec, maybe we need to take this a bit more seriously. And so I think, for companies, knowing that alumni is coming out of the early adopter and into the mass market, I would almost, I hate to say it, give the same kind of advice of don't shut up about it. And you talked about, this has happened, HR is very cyclical. This has happened before. This is how it works. And you either are going to wait for the market to catch up and people will then suddenly be like, oh, she was right all along. Or you're going to stand up and start screaming and good for you, because this market's exploding and there aren't enough community professionals out there to handle the size of this market. So if you have this skill, you are in a niche right now to take advantage of.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I think this year is the year of transformation, because we are like last year, we were responding and then returning to work and then returning back to not work and all of that. But this year is really a year of incredible transformation and opportunity in the way that you can actually now try new things. And if you haven't gone into the alumni space, try something, try it out, and then shout about the successes. Absolutely, shout about them, like play them up and make it happen. I think the other quick point that I wanted to make is the connection with diversity and inclusion and equity, because these are massive topics, obviously, this year from 2020 and into 2021, and women have exited the workforce actually in much higher numbers than the men because of the caregiving obligations and all of that. But they're still there, right? They didn't choose to, they didn't want to. Most of them probably didn't want to go exit the workforce, but maybe they have small children that nobody takes care of right now. So what are they going to do? But they're still there. So you can bring them back, right? If you develop these women to actually be in a leadership role, for example, as many organizations do, come back to them, right?
Can I double down on that and ask you a question? So I totally agree. Across the board, there are a lot of people, especially women, who didn't sign up to be full-time caregivers. They were always, I'm a career woman and I'm going to have kids and I'm going to have help. And that's how they're choosing to live their life. And amazing. And I love that exists. And exactly as you say, the majority of parental stuff has fallen, and you've seen women exit the workforce, not by choice. And they are coming out and saying, is there part-time work? Is there project-based work? And so, how does that tie? I mean, is there project work? When you think about these top, global 1,000 companies, is there project work? Should they have a re-entry or a part-time system? What is the move that, an alumni team that has thousands of these very disgruntled, now new teachers, working from home, like what is the move?
Yeah, and I think alumni should definitely be part of this alternative workforce scenario that organizations are more and more framing around. And actually, that was another trend that came out of the Deloitte Human Capital Trends report, that more and more organizations don't just see you either a full-time employee or you don't work with us. There's so many different ways you should and can engage with organizations, whether that's a contractor, a consultant, a gig worker, a crowd worker, part-time, like remote, of course, is now a given, but even that used to be kind of an odd thing out, and find ways that could apply and could engage your alumni as well. And it could be women, for example, that could say, well, yeah, I can come back, but I can't come back full time. I can come back 20 hours a week, or I can job share with somebody. So organizations are more and more looking at many of these different employment scenarios and using them in a much more strategic way.
That's a really amazing takeaway for the people on the listening in, which is have a look at what your organization is doing around part-time or contract talent and find that team and tell them you've got thousands of incredible people who left the company because they can't be available between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. and they can't be available between this time and this time, but they are available here. And so they had no choice but to leave in the best interest of their family or the best interest of the company. And I think that's an amazing thing to take to someone. I don't think anyone's going to hear that data and be like, oh, we shouldn't do something. So it's almost an amazing email to send out to your community. You know, have you given up your work life because of pandemic? Would you be interested in? If so, let us know. And I think those are the wins that we're looking for. I think, you know, the same as all these other teams, we're looking for what are the wins that can take alumni in the organization from nice to have, fun to have, to, oh shit, this is real. And again, you and I can talk about it all day, but until someone has that moment, it doesn't really matter. And I think the gig work is critical. And I think it's going to continue, actually. I think companies are more willing around the job sharing. Companies are more willing to, because they just want the right talent. I mean, I think about us, you know, we've always been a global organization willing to hire the best talent, but we've generally centered it around metro areas. But why? We're missing out on 99.9% of amazing people because what? They don't live in the Los Angeles or the London or the Sydney region. Like, that's ridiculous. And so pandemic has allowed us to recognize the ridiculous of one second, we've been excluding pretty much the whole world just because they're not in this backyard. And I think companies are starting to do exactly this. I just want the best person to do the job. That's it.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Absolutely. And have some flexibility and have them do it on their terms as well, right? So the more flexible you can be, the better talent you will get, because you're not forcing them into your way of working. You're giving them their flexibility to do their way of working.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I had a question coming in talking about the war on talent and, you know, this perpetual war on talent and essentially the moving of one job to another job. I am misreading this awfully, but essentially the conversation was, you know, a lot of people, what about the kind of the bottom of the workforce? The bottom of the workforce, as you talk about, maybe the truck driver, maybe those people where jobs are moving to automation. You know, a lot of people think about alumni from a senior or a leadership or an executive. What about the on the ground, you know, person who's out of work, not because of pandemic, out of work because of the fourth industrial revolution? You know, I guess, how do they not be ignored as part of this talent conversation?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to how can you help them upskill and reskill, right? We hear so much about apps. We heard so much before the pandemic, and we keep hearing now a lot about upskilling, reskilling, right skilling, whatever I want to call it. And usually people think about this within their organization, but the best organizations think beyond the organizational walls. And what better place to start with outside of your immediate organization than with your alumni, right? So the truck driver or whatever, I don't know, warehouse loader or something like that used to work with you and now their job got automated. Can you help them upskill and get some better development so they can have another job like that is not going to be automated?
I agree. It's kind of the future is how can we be of service to you? I think that's where it's going to change.
That's right.
So first of all, Kathi, I want to say thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. It's so appreciated. I think one of the big takeaways I saw in the chat from a lot of people was we want all these numbers. So I might try and put the numbers from your report into maybe a little one-page infographic for everyone.
Oh, right. I can help with that. Yes, absolutely.
I think that'd be a lovely send off for everyone if they just want to hear all of this stuff and all the stuff in the study. So I think that's a great idea. I want to thank you for your time. You're incredible. You've been an amazing advisor and insight to us. And I just want to thank you for spending an hour with us. And I'm so glad you're not a professor of mathematics.
Well,
and
thank
you are
you.
in the position that you're in.
Thank you, James. It has been great. And thanks for giving me an hour of your time. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathi. Thank you, everyone. I wish you all a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye.